Welcome to today's episode of our podcast where we dive deep into the transformative journeys of individuals who inspire us to reconnect with our true selves. Joining us is Michael Tierno, guiding light in the realm of expanded states of consciousness. Since 2016, Michael has shifted from a staunch rational materialist, which I want to discuss too, to a passionate advocate for spiritual growth and healing. His profound experiences in Peru opened his heart, leading him to embrace the divine feminine and sacred masculine within. Talk about that too. As a co-founder of Heart Sanctuary, help me with this word, Ayahuasca, retreat center, and the Universal Awareness Fellowship, Michael dedicates his life to helping others awaken their dormant wisdom and connect with their divine essence. Today, he'll be sharing insights with his journey, offer valuable tools for those navigating life challenges, particularly for our listeners over 40 who are on their own path of healing and self-discovery after divorce. Welcome to the Don't Pick the Scab podcast with the premise of connecting men over 40 with the tools and community to thrive in their divorce recovery either before, during, or after a divorce. So take it away, Michael. Tell us about yourself. I've got some questions for you.
Sure. My name is Michael Tierno. First of all, thank you, David, for having me on. Really, the group of your audience is really the group that one of my projects called Men of Integrity work with men. Most average age is like 42. So it's right in line. Perfect. All across the map from mid-30s to as old as 65. We host transformational retreats in the United States using various expanded states modalities, really allowing men to connect, to get past the clutter that's in mind and connect with their deeper wisdom. That's primarily what I do. I also work with people one-on-one in my office north of San Francisco. And as you mentioned, the Ayahuasca Retreat Center in Peru, which is a different animal altogether. Also expanded states, but a little more intense. Obviously, a bit more of a commitment in terms of flying there to another country and doing that. It's been a great passion of mine. Expanded states have transformed myself, really changed my life, impacted my life in ways that I couldn't have imagined prior to having started this journey.
Wow. Can you share the story, the beginning and the end of the transformation from a rational materialist to someone deeply connected to expanded states of consciousness? What is the beginning and what is the end?
Right. The end hasn't happened yet, because for starters, but the beginning was basically I used to be, prior to turning 42, I was what you call a rational materialist, atheist, very staunch believer in that there was nothing beyond the physical realm, and was very dismissive, maybe rude about, and also very logically consistent with, I believe, with my beliefs about that sort of thing. I went to Peru, so it's a longer story there. Ended up going to Peru to try ayahuasca in a retreat center. Spent a week there. In my first journey, I actually on the flight down, I remember being like, had read all about this, and I was early to the game. Right now it's quite popular, especially on the West Coast, ayahuasca in these kind of expanded states modalities. But back then it was a little bit less known. It was a little more unknown. And I had been reading on Reddit and on the web about these transformational experiences. And I remember writing down in my journal on the way down on the airplane, either this is all there is, what I've been believing all this time, or maybe there's something more. Either way, I'm fine with it. I was going to be fine with it either way. I was relatively satisfied with life, kids, business, and all that kind of stuff. And first day of the retreat, we're sitting around the circle, probably like 25 people in the circle, and the shaman passes around the drink and everybody takes a drink. And immediately, I said, "What did you do to yourself?" I was very uncomfortable, seeing all kinds of stuff going on and like outside of my regular reality. And I remembered something that the facilitator had said at the beginning, which is, "Don't worry, in 4 hours, whatever happens, it'll be over. We'll be sitting around having fruit." This is the best thing you can do is trust and surrender. And so I said, all right, I'm going to trust and surrender. So I just relaxed into the experience and really felt this deep connection with basically all of creation in a way that I really felt connection. It was deep, it was powerful, it was blissful, ecstatic, and very hyper aware of everything that I was connected. The super realization that I was connected to everything, and that there was like a spirit, there was spirit in here, there was soul in here, there was some kind of divinity that I had not connected with prior to that. And I said, okay, now that I've experienced this, I need to explore this and make this sort of realization a deeper part of my life. I had all kinds of realizations about, what would you call them, behaviors, coping behaviors and all that kind of stuff. Why I did this, why I did that. Relationships were put into different perspectives. Deeper awareness about everything around my life and my surroundings and how I was in the world and who people were to me and the importance of family, the importance of this, that, and the other thing. And it was profoundly transformational.
Wow.
That was a week, and it completely transformed how I look at almost everything now. Deep sense of gratitude, incredible sense of compassion for others in terms of not personalizing things, making fewer assumptions about why people do the things they do, a deep recognition that everybody's on this human experience on their own path, and that oftentimes when people, in the way that, is most comfortable for me for them to behave, that it's the realization is that they're behaving the way they're behaving because of some hurt or pain or some life experience that they're having that is preventing them from optimally engaging in the world. And since then, I've been really immersed just in coursework, working with different teachers to connect more deeply with spirit, more deeply with myself, and connecting with my intuition, and just trying to be a better person all around.
I think you answered this a little bit. You mentioned recognizing the divine feminine and sacred masculine within yourself. How has honoring these energies impacted your life, especially in the context of relationships, friendships, all that stuff?
This is a long discussion. So the way when we started the men's group, we had to get a good understanding of what does it mean to be masculine and feminine, or what are these words, because they have so much charge. And after really thinking about this and doing quite a bit of reading, recognizing that it's part of the charge. When you hear masculinity in the West, in our culture, it's usually not thought of as something positive. People have this idea of the quote unquote toxic masculine. And we all know what that is, right? It's basically somebody who's controlling, maybe violent, cruel, very hard-hearted, right? And I said, really, that's not my experience in terms of being a man, in terms of being like, when I feel masculine, when I feel embodied in my masculinity, I don't feel those things. So I did some research and some reading about Carl Jung, and I started looking at what is the characteristics of the divine masculine. What are the positive masculine traits? And also, what are the positive feminine traits? And immediately when you think about so let's go to the feminine, because it's very important, because it helps us to understand the toxic masculine. If you think about those traits that we usually associate with femininity, you think of things like intuition, as opposed to intuition, right? Women's intuition, that's primarily one of those things. We think of things like empathy, emotional expression. We think of kindness and healing nature, those kinds of things. And what I realized was all the characteristics of the toxic masculine are actually the opposite of the divine feminine, right? What I was talking about, hard-hearted, cruel, violent, controlling, those are diametrically opposed to what we think of as feminine. I said, well, that's interesting. Doesn't seem that toxic masculinity has anything to do with masculinity. It seems to me to be a retraction away from those kind of softer, more kind-hearted constellation of attributes that we all have, that we all can have, that we all long to have as part of the human experience. After some more research, I identified another archetype called the wounded feminine. And then I was like, oh, this is so interesting, because the characteristics of the wounded feminine are diametrically opposite to the positive, to when we think of the positive masculine, right? The sacred or divine masculine. So what's the positive masculine? It is to be protective. It is to logic. Males are associated with being more head first logic, chain of logic kind of things, unflappable in the face of danger, right? You think of the military in terms of what they have to do, or a hospital when they have to, like in the ER, they have to be very, very much focused on an emergency situation, on not losing themselves, a very strong internal locus of control, meaning that I have responsibility over my own life.
Okay.
And then when you look at the wounded feminine archetype, it's the exact opposite. It's irrationality, hysteria, victim mentality, all these kinds of things. And so my hypothesis and the way I talk about these things is that when we talk to little boys or little girls, and we're talking to men here, so let's talk about little boys, and they are being expressive, leading from their heart, being sweet. And their dad, for example, will tell them, don't be a wuss or worse, right? There's other things that friends and other male role models might tell them, don't be that way. That's not being a man. You got to man up, all these kinds of stuff. You can't be sweet. You can't be kind. You can't be gentle. And so that little boy, in an attempt to seek approval to these other people in their lives, retract away from those characteristics that are thought of as feminine. And then what do you get? If you're retracting away from that kindness, gentle intuition, you're going to retract away into hard-hearted nature. So my thesis is that the toxic masculine has nothing to do with masculinity. It's actually a retraction from those characteristics that we typically define as feminine, that we all have anyway. And you could do the same as thought exercise with a little girl who's very active, sports, a tomboy, and the parents say she's logic, she likes, let's say, science and all that stuff. And their parents say, hey, that's not very ladylike. You need to be demure and soft and all this kind of stuff. In order to get approval from mom and dad, she retracts away from those characteristics that are thought of as masculine. And then you get the opposite of that, which is a victim mentality, hysterical, illogical, irrational, all those kinds of stuff. And those people who are in that wounded feminine archetype, they don't cause problems for society. They're not talked about because they think about stereotypically the cat ladies that are holed away in their house and they're huddled away, or the hoarders. But who's causing problems in society? It's those men, typically, who have retracted away from those softer, more feminine characteristics, feminine identified characteristics of gentleness, kindness, intuition. And they've retracted into their toxic masculine, and they make up the majority of our prisons, the majority of a crime, and all that kind of stuff. And it's so much more, it's such a better experience to be living from the positive manifestation of the masculine and the feminine, to be logical and flappable and capable in the world, and also intuitive and kind and gentle. That's where you want to be.
All I'm seeing right now, man, I took all that in. All I'm seeing right now is an X and Y graph where you have the X men, positive, negative, and you have the Y, positive, negative women. And somewhere on those four corners, we exist.
Yeah. You can exist either. You're absolutely right, and that's one of the slides that I show in my relationship presentation.
Hey, yeah, man, we're similar thinking. Watch out.
So I must have explained it. Obviously, got it.
Wow. Let's transfer into my divorced men over 40. Man, you got me X and Y. I can't let it go right now. Okay. For someone over 40 going through a divorce, how can connecting with their untapped wisdom help them heal and rebuild their life?
Oh my God, that's so important. And I think outside of, so you have what we do in our retreats, which is a way to connect that way. But the advice I would give to any man who is either getting divorced by his partner or wanting to divorce his partner, first thing is to do a deep dive into what their contribution was. This is what I did when I got divorced. What my contribution was to the relationship not working out. Why is that? So many people blame their partner, and guess what? You're not going to be with that person anymore because you're getting divorced. So by blaming them, all you're doing is putting the onus of responsibility on them. So what I like to do, what I recommend, I say, is to really take ownership of where you could have done differently, either to save the relationship or not been in the relationship in the first place. In the end of the day, it's your responsibility. That
Correct.
the So even what are the red flags that I dismissed, that I didn't pay attention to early on in the relationship, that I thought were okay just because I was scared of being alone, or because I thought she was super attractive, or whatever the reasons are that you dismiss these red flags. If it's the case, that is on you, right? So don't make that
Mhm.
same mistake again. Or throughout the relationship, what are the ways that we as men, we tend to withdraw when we come out with some emotion? Instead of containing that emotion and being a supportive partner, maybe we withdraw into alcohol, drugs, or different things, or just being sports, watching
Yep.
tons of sports, and not being that safe, trusting space for our partner to be able to be and express herself in that kind of expressive way that women have. So where are the places that I screwed up? Because if we put the blame only on the other person, which so many people are apt to do, then immediately there's nothing wrong with I didn't contribute anything to the relationship. And invariably you find people who don't do that deep dive, they jump right into a relationship with the same person, and in the case of your audience, the same woman with a different name, and they find
Yep.
themselves in the same problem. So what did you do to do that? And that's a process of introspection. How can I do better in my next relationship, should you choose to have one? That's super important for me. It's something that I did, and I'm in a fantastic relationship now.
That was the thing I did too soon. I dated too soon, and instead of working on myself, crash and burn every time. And it was the
Mm-hmm.
same type of woman who I divorced
Exactly. Right.
every single time. Oh my God. And it was funny to the point where I had to sit back and say, wait a minute, let me work on myself a little bit and go from there. What role does gratitude and grace play in healing from a major life transition like divorce?
Gratitude plays in everything, right? First of all, just be thankful for your life. The fact that there's so much research about gratitude and the importance of gratitude, and how gratitude can just make you be a more pleasant person and have a better experience in this existence. There's so many different types of gratitude practices that one can have. You could do a daily gratitude meditation, or just set a timer on your phone, and it goes off at random times per day, and you just think about two things that you're grateful for in that moment. But just humans tend to focus on the negative. Why? Because evolutionarily speaking, you want to get away from the lion, the tiger, the
Yep.
problem, find the food, those kind of stuff. So we're hyper focused on the negative, and by hyper focusing on those things that are not going well, we ignore those things that are going well, that give the real joy to life. And any kind of gratitude practice is super helpful to refocus our mind on those things that we can appreciate in life, whether it be friends, or our children, or even having a job, food on the table, a roof over our head. All those things are things that are worthy of being grateful about in every moment, because we know that people don't have that. Many people in the world don't have those things. In terms of grace, I think of grace as appreciating people beyond their behavior, like recognizing and not personalizing things, like we were talking about early on. Is just give people a little bit of grace and a little bit of compassion. People, we all make mistakes, and to the extent that we learn from them, it's part of the human experience. So when I think of grace, that's mostly what I think about is compassion, which is tied up there with gratitude and compassion. Very
Go hand in
powerful.
hand. Wow. How can expanded states of consciousness help someone process the pain of a broken relationship?
So let's talk a little bit about what these expanded states do, right? So whether you're talking about psychedelics, there's some types of breath work that can happen, meditation. You can go out, there's a lot of different things. Going out into nature changes your experience from the experience you're having right now in your regular day-to-day life. So when we're going about our days in the regular day-to-day life, we have our same emotions, our same kind of thoughts, the same, I think 95% of our thoughts are the same every day. We're ruminating on the same things. We're doing the same kind of thing. And we're looking at the world through a lens created by our past, by our beliefs, prior traumas. But beliefs is a big deal. Like expectations about the world, self-thoughts, self-talk, all these different things. They're just this kind of cognitive soup that we're immersed in. that we can't extract ourselves out. We believe that this soup, this cognitive thought soup that we're in, this ego that we're in, is actually the true reality, but it's really a structure that's been built up from our past, right? Most expanded states drop that structure, even for 30 minutes during intensive breath work, to 4 hours doing some psychedelics, up to 6, 8 hours doing some other psychedelics. Being out in nature outside of your typical environment can cause some of these things to drop away because we don't have all the cues that are prompting the same thoughts. But we're able to look at our lives, look at ourselves without that filter of thought and ego that we're walking through and looking at the world through normally. And when you drop that, the lens through which you're looking at it, the life looks different. You can see from a different perspective the same things, the same relationship that you might think that, hey, that person is an asshole, right? Excuse my French, right? And then you go back and you say, actually, I remember these things. I didn't treat that person that well in this experience. Wow, the thing I said might have really triggered them in this way. Like, you can just see things from a different frame of reference, and this goes on and on. Why do I have this belief that I'm not deserving to have this type of life? For example, some people have beliefs that they're not worthy to have a certain type of life. Why do I feel that, or that I need to be a certain way? I need to be perfect in all ways in order to be loved. Is that true? And all of a sudden you realize, oh, that came from childhood. This is a pattern that I developed and I put on myself. And especially in my experience with the psychedelics, especially these sort of like beliefs that are operating sometimes, oftentimes out of awareness, because they are the water in which we're swimming. When they drop away, we can see them as operating in our lives and be like, wow, I don't need to believe that way anymore. A personal example, my first journeys down in Peru, I was a drinker, not a heavy drinker, but I was a regular drinker, social drinker, that kind of thing, alcohol. And my first or second journey, I can't remember exactly what it was, I realized that my desire, my pull towards drinking alcohol in social situations was connected to some shame that I wasn't even aware of. I said, wow, you're doing this to cover up this thing and make you feel a little bit more lubricated in social situations so that you don't feel that shame. And it allowed me to say, do the deep dive and say, what are you ashamed about? And I was like, really, there's nothing. It's just the sensation there, but it's not tied to anything in particular. And I let it go. I just let that shame go.
Yep.
Just went poof. There was no, because I had been swimming in that egoic filter where the shame was a part of my being without recognizing that it was there, because it's just part of my existence. And connecting the dots there allowed me to drop that. And then also, much alcohol, the use went down to near nothing after that. And another one where I went from a little bit to none was just like, when I do drink, this was 5 years ago, it was, I'm bored, nothing to do, kind of makes things more interesting. And I did another journey and I was like, if you fill your life up with things you like doing, you won't be bored. And so I've been keeping myself quite busy learning and doing things ever since. And I haven't even touched any alcohol in 5 years.
So you brought alcohol up. Isn't alcohol an altered state?
It is an altered state, but it's a different type of altered state.
Interesting. I just thought about that.
You know, what's funny is my teacher in Peru, in an interview that I did with her, she said that she believed that if it was done intentionally and for a reason, one could use alcohol for some good. She said she never did it. She's not known anybody to do it. But I think the problem with alcohol is that it does mask a lot of it does mask a lot of the pain, and it doesn't work in the same way as the psychedelics, for example. For example, psychedelics, not addictive at all, right?
Yep.
Whenever someone goes into a psychedelic and expanded state experience, it's not usually, hey, we're going to go do ayahuasca in Peru. It's usually like with a great sense of trepidation and respect. Okay, we're going to go into this being and we're going to see what's operating in there that I'm currently not in awareness. Alcohol, in my experience, is more of a mask So like I was
Yep.
having the shame, I'm tapping it down. It's also quite addictive. You get used to that experience and that escape from
Then it takes more and more.
and it takes more and more.
Yep.
The psychedelics are known to not be addictive at all.
Oh, anyway. What about the subject of self-care? Men over 40 suck at that. They want to take care of everybody else. They don't take care of themselves. And I always talk about the plane's going down. You put your mask on first, not your kids. And what's your thoughts on that? And how can men over 40 do better?
Self-care is a huge thing. We call it in the Men of Integrity, we call it the DD, the daily discipline, right? You need to take some time to take care of yourself. There's so many ways. It's such a huge thing. From diet, what are you putting into your body? You're putting in whole foods or you're putting in garbage. Exercising regularly. People your and my age, like we got to exercise, at least walk,
Yeah.
because this ticker is not going to go on forever if you're not exercising it. Sleep is important. Everybody knows what are the things that are important. How can you do it? Slow down, make it a priority. How can you make it a priority? It's tough to do it when you always, not you particular, David, but when one is always putting it off. What I can tell you that many of my self-care initiatives have been prompted by recognition of the importance of taking care of self after a psychedelic journey. And it's something that in the retreats, for example, we have a whole workshop on hydration, food, self-talk, right? How do you talk to yourself? How do you talk to others? And sleep. And yeah, there's a whole program on that. We model all of this. All of the food that we serve on the retreat is all whole foods, super healthy stuff, good, showing people that you can eat tasty food and still be healthy. Lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of animal products that are not processed, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's just a matter of learning and educating oneself about what are the things that one can do to take better care of themselves, and then practicing. You don't have to also transform yourself in one day. All of a sudden, in fact, that's a recipe for disaster. I'm going to stop this. I'm going to stop that. I'm going to start eating only whole foods. I'm going to exercise 5 times a week. Good luck with all of that. Little steps. Try to make little steps over time. And over time, those little steps, you continue to make those changes. And before you know it, you're going to be in a really better self-care situation.
What about the trifecta? My famous trifecta: self-respect, self-esteem, and there was another one. Self-esteem, self-respect, and self-love. Mm-hmm. What about that trifecta?
Primary amongst those is self-love. Self-respect and self-esteem follow from self-love.
Self-love.
Right? So self-love is one of the most profound things that I see people recognizing in themselves is a renewed sense of self-love coming out of an altered state experience, where all that thought I was talking about before, all that egoic mind chatter and stuff, a lot of that's negative self-talk. A lot of that is frankly depressing. If you heard out loud what some people say to themselves on a regular basis, that would be depressing. And they are, again, swimming in that water of this negative self-talk. That's all tied up to other stuff. All is tied up to their past. Through the altered state, you shove that away for a little bit of time, and they can see the difference between that self-talk that's banging around and who they really are. And all of a sudden, boom, wow, what a blessing it is to be alive. What an amazing opportunity I have. Now you find self-love, and it's critical. I think that's the first one. Self-respect and self-esteem will come if you can love yourself and you can recognize yourself and give gratitude for even having the opportunity to have this human existence.
Wow. All right, Michael, where can the people find you on the web? And I'll have the contact information at the bottom of the show notes. Let the people out there know where to find you.
You find me at michaeltiernoguide.com. They can find our men's retreats at moi.community. That's moi.community on the web also. And if they're interested in going to Peru and having a connection with the grandmother, as she's known, Ayahuasca, with the place that I've co-founded down there, because I need a place, because people ask me, where can I go to do ayahuasca? And I can't recommend every place. There's great places all over, but there's a lot of places that I absolutely wouldn't recommend. So we have a place there that I can highly recommend. I know everybody that works there. They're all in integrity, all with a real passion. That's heartsanctuaryretreats.com. And those are 3 opportunities that you can work with me. And if you want to work with me one-on-one, it's michaeltiernoguy.com.
All right, Michael. Man, I didn't know what to expect. And I still have questions, so we got to come back and revisit this because
I'd be happy to, David. Super interesting.
we just got on the tip of the iceberg. But we appreciate you talking to us, and hold on the line, and we'll close it out. Da, 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 da.